The world Vampirella thought she knew is starting to come apart at the seams, and we find out why in our review of Vampirella number 667 from Dynamite Comics. See you in 3. And welcome back to Comical Opinions. This is our review of Vampirella number 667 from Dynamite Comics, and in this issue, we unravel the lies behind Vampirella's reality when the spirits increasingly start to invade her dreams. But before we get started, please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that bell for notification. Your attention is greatly appreciated, and make sure you stay tuned to the end for the final score. Before we get into the meat of the issue, let's talk about the details. This issue is written by Christopher Priest. Art and colors by Ergon Gunduz. Hopefully I'm saying that right. There's a lot of symbols there. Letters by Willie Schubert, and the main cover A, is drawn by Lucio Perillo, and the model for that cover is quite clearly Faces by Reishi, otherwise known as the cosplayer Rachel Holland. Pretty obvious. All right, so let's recap what happened in the previous issue, which is sort of a renumbering reset for 666 for obvious reasons of the supernatural, and talk about what happened. So Vampirella is sort of waking up, and she's on Earth, and she imagines that she is undercover, or at least living a double life as a school teacher. She's hanging out with kids. Life is good. She comes home to Victory and Benny because, just to hang out, but she can jump through not a magical portal, but just like a supernatural sort of sciencey portal to get to the other side of the country in Los Angeles to be with her husband, Matt Exed, who is a law enforcement agent. And she hops back and forth just to visit with friends on one side of the country, her husband on the other side of the country, and then by day, she's a school teacher. It all seems kind of weirdly... normal is not the right word for a Draculian alien from another planet, but normal enough in that she's living a very sedate, quiet, peaceful life. Her mother is also off being effectively a superhero by hanging out with the Marys, hunting down vampires. So all kinds of things that are happening there that are definitely weird and quirky, but at the same time, it's not high drama. She's not constantly embroiled in all these big major conflicts. She's basically in kind of a quiet for her, quiet, sedate life. But something's not right. She keeps having these time loopy dreams where she's talked to by voices in her head from little kids. One of them is a little kid that seems very angry and telling her that she doesn't belong here. And then the dream always ends with seeing a blonde version of herself, and that blonde version kills her, which wakes her up, and then the loop starts over again and she goes back to her daily life. But the dreams are becoming increasingly persistent and troubling and disturbing. That was the first issue. Now we get to the second issue, and we see a prologue that is borrowed from the Vampirella Interstellar arc, where we're introduced to Shane, who is the first man who looks like Rasputin the Mad Monk, but he turns out he's from an alternate version of our moon, from an alternate version of our Earth, in a parallel world where that moon was terraformed by Draculians to be very confusing. Be honest with you, I did not like Interstellar. I thought it was needlessly complex, very complicated, very confusing, and when you put that together with Christopher Priest's writing style, which tends to be overly complex, overly confusing, and not enjoyable to read, it's a really bad mix. And you need a flow chart and a marker board to figure out Interstellar, and that is, in my opinion, no offense to Christopher Priest, that's ridiculous. That's not storytelling. That's like, you needed to lay off the weed, is all I'm going to say on that one. Okay, we'll let that one go. So what happens in this issue? The dreams are repeating. She keeps getting stuck in this time loop. And the story doesn't seem to really be going anywhere other than the dreams are now becoming more persistent. And she sees this little boy who's angry and telling her she doesn't belong here. Now, if you look at Interstellar, go back to that arc, the little boy looks exactly like Shane's son. So you're already getting the impression that there is some kind of reality warping or reality bending going on here, because although Vampirella's life seems pretty good, or at least okay, things are propping up that come from other series and other miniseries and other arcs that feel like they've been left out or somehow taken out, and now Vampirella's psyche or subconscious is starting to recognize it. She hops over to talk to Matt, and things are okay, but he wants her to talk to like a psychiatrist, in this case, maybe Dr. Chari, to kind of work things out, even though the good doctor now knows that she really is a vampire and doesn't think she's crazy. So that helps get rid of that gag, which dragged on way too long. But yeah, something's definitely happening here. And then through the course of the day, Vampirella hops back to see her mother, who's off on another vampire hunting mission, and she gets some consolation and some hugs and some support, emotional support, which is good, which is helpful. But she still feels like something's off, and she keeps having these dreams that always end with her dying at the hands of a blonde version of herself, which, if you're familiar with Vampirella lore, is Dracula, Lilith's real, or I would say original daughter, the person on which Vampirella was originally cloned and created from. So essentially, Vampirella is a clone of Dracula, who is Lilith's original daughter. And so the existence of Dracula doesn't exist in this reality, but she's seeing her, and it's impinging on her mind. So after a few days of this, Vampirella heads back to her home apartment. Benny's not there, but Benny, in the meantime, Benny and Victory have been talking to the little boy, Shane's boy, who was originally in Vampirella's mind, but now seems to have come out into the physical world, at least the physical world of this reality, and told them everything that's going on, or at least a good chunk of what's going on. And so when Vampirella gets back to her apartment, Benny's gone, the kid is gone, and Victory seems like she's getting ready to leave, and says, Dracula, the kid is right. He talked to us. He came out. He's in the world. He talked to us and told us everything. You don't belong here. You've got to figure out what's going on. And he said, well, what did the boy tell you? He said, well, the blonde woman is your sister, or your clone sister, if you want to call it that. You've been feeling off from a maternal point of view because you've had a baby recently, and that baby is still alive. And the baby is with your mother, who isn't really a vampire hunter superhero, but she's just an evil person. And these are all story elements that come from the other Vampirella series that are going on, particularly when it comes to her child, the Vampirella Dracula Rage miniseries that's currently going on right now. And then the kids that you've been seeing, who you've been teaching in school, and Benny were all killed in that plane crash that came at the beginning of the Interstellar arc. So there's like all these bits and elements that are being pulled in that if you didn't have any of the context of when these things happen, you have no idea what's going on. There are occasional editor's notes that help you out, but for the most part, if you're not very, very, very steeped in the other Vampirella series that have happened and are currently happening, you're going to feel some loss here. But that's the long and the short of it is. So she's imagining people and places and situations that she's encountered both currently and in the past, and it's all sort of coming together to remind her through Victory that this is not your reality. Something has changed your reality, and you're the one who did it, is that last twist. And at that moment, Victory says, you've got to wake up. So Victory pulls out a grenade and sets off the grenade, and then you get a big boom. And it looks like Victory's dead, maybe Vampirella's dead, not quite sure. But at the very least, there's a bit of a cliffhanger there. And that's where we end the issue. So obviously, what's the thing that you've got to take away from a just informational perspective is Christopher Priest is relying heavily on elements that happen in the Interstellar arc. So if you really want to get into it, go ahead and go for it. I'm not going to tell you not to, but I'm just going to tell you you're going to have to take some notes to figure out what's going on. It gets that complicated. Then on the other side of it, when it comes to her baby and what Victory's talking about with Vampirella's baby, you've got to be up to speed on the current Vampirella Dracula Rage miniseries that's happening right now, because all the elements concerning a baby and Matt Exed and her husband are all pretty much taking place within the context of that miniseries and the one that came before it. So what do we think? I mean, I'm not painting a rosy picture here. I'm just going to be honest. It's the truth. But what do we think? The ending saves it. So when we talk about Christopher Priest writing, he's very non-linear. He likes to jump around. He doesn't like to provide much context, except for an occasional caption box to specify the current location and maybe sometimes the date. But his sequential style is not. It's very non-sequential. So he hops around a lot. doesn't explain or set up much. So you really have to kind of stay on your toes, and you have to work to figure out what's going on in the story, which personally I don't like. But that's the style, that's the way it goes. But if you want to get into it and you really want to get into the lore and you want to immerse yourself, or at least force yourself to immerse yourself, you get a lot of information in this particular issue. And even though we're not a fan of, I personally am not a fan of the way Christopher Priest writes, because it is so chaotic and jumbled and non-sequential. The last third of this issue saves it, because he does a lot through Victory's conversation with Vampirella to explain everything that's happening, which is usually a down point for Christopher Priest, because if things happen and you don't quite understand what's going on, he goes a long way to explain what's happening in that last big scene with Vampirella and Victory. And it kind of now presents a clearer picture. It gives the story focus. It gives it momentum. It's sort of out of sequence with the Vampirella Dracula Rage miniseries that's happening right now, but at least it gives you context, it gives you the picture, and it gives you focus and direction, and that's what you're looking for. When a series like this, you don't want to be just stuck in these time loops and these random events and things not making sense without eventually providing some context. The last third provides a lot of context, provides a lot of information, and it makes it easier to follow. What didn't we like about it? All the things that I just explained before that. You have to be really up to speed on Interstellar, which was, oh boy, that was rough. That Interstellar was rough, really rough. So you're forced to kind of get into this one. You have forced to go back and figure out what's going on with Interstellar. On the same side, you also have to understand what's going on with Vampirella Dracula Rage, which is not bad. It's not the best, but it's better. It's okay. It's okay. So there's too much reliance on things that are happening outside of this issue. So this makes it feel like this particular series, which should be the main Vampirella series, feels like a side story. It feels like a mini series that should be on the side, when it's not. It's the main Vampirella comic, and it shouldn't feel like a side story to other things that are miniseries, and so it just kind of feels weird. How about the art? All right, so we've had some issues with Urgun Gundoz in the past, because even Christopher Priest himself, he likes Urgun because Urgun is not a comic artist, he's an illustrator, and it's a little bit different. The difference is illustrators are very much about the artistic presentation, but comic artists also have to include things like perspective and motion and activity. You have to feel like, even though they're static pictures, they have to feel like they're moving. So Urgun's had some issues with that in the past. It's gotten much better. So even though this has a very unique style and feels in some places a little flat and a little bit staticky, it's much improved. Still not great. It's not the best comic art you've ever seen, and there's definitely a sort of a digital vibe to it with the way the character designs are sort of just placed on top of backgrounds in some places. So there's a disconnect there, and it feels very flat from an integration perspective as far as making the characters feel like they're part of the setting. You don't really get that here. It feels like color forms. If you've ever used color forms, it feels that way, but much improved. Not the best, still, but much improved. So final thoughts. What do we think about Vampirella number 667? The connections to Interstellar and Vampirella Dracula Rage are a bummer, because it relies too heavily on deep knowledge of both of those arcs. And the first half, or I should say first 2/3 of this comic, feel very convoluted and repetitive in some places, and even just disconnected. But the last third makes up for a lot of it, and makes the story feel a lot more interesting, and gives it purpose and direction, which is a positive. Therefore, we're going to give Vampirella 667 from Dynamite Comics a 6.8 out of 10. 6.8 out of 10. I think that's the right score. Therefore, we hope you enjoyed this review. And if you want more reviews, just like, before we get there, are you reading Vampirella? Do you like Vampirella as a character? Are you liking what Christopher Priest is doing with Vampirella? I want to hear your thoughts and opinions, and let's talk about it. Maybe we got it wrong, and I want to hear your reaction to these stories. So leave your comment down below, and if you like more reviews like this, please stay tuned through the outro.